joining us today, Sahil, at Career and Development. Thanks so much for taking out the time. Just
No
to
worries, you're welcome.
just to quickly introduce you to our listeners, Sahil is a consultant at the Asian Development Bank, and with about 4.5 years of experience of working at the ADB, Sahil is a perfect person to consult regarding opportunities of working with multilateral organizations. I first spoke to Sahil about a year ago when we were understanding the development sector landscape for launching career and development. And Sahil was very generous with his time then, as he has been now. And I was blown away by the information Sahil shared with me. Now that we were thinking about people to deconstruct the multilateral space, we thought Sahil is a perfect person to consult again. Thank you again, Sahil, for taking out the time.
No worries, Ria. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm happy to talk to you about anything that you need to know for your initiative, career and development.
Great. So Sahil, how about we begin by just talking about your current role at the Asian Development Bank? What do you do on a day-to-day basis? What are your responsibilities?
Sure. Right. Currently, I'm working as a consultant, specifically in Indonesia for a project that works on financial inclusion in overall Indonesia, but specific is focusing on Eastern Indonesia. So it's when I speak about financial inclusion, it includes three broad aspects, which is financial access, literacy, financial literacy, and consumer protection. So our work is divided into all these three areas, depending on what the the Financial Services Authority of Indonesia needs from us and what the project requirements are. So as a consultant, I generally day-to-day activities include stakeholder management, team coordination. I review a lot of proposals and research and content that needs to be shared from the team on ground, and any other specific content that needs to be reviewed. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, and I also talk to potential partners in the fintech sector or NGOs or similar development institutions in Indonesia who are trying to do financial inclusion work. So yeah, that's I have a team on ground, a team of 5 people, and I have also there are fellow consultants from around the world. I also work with consultants in, like consumer protection lawyer in the US. I work with another experienced banker in India, and a couple of other local consultants.
You've been here for about 4.5 years now. So how has the work that you've done evolved with time?
Sure. This current consultancy role is specifically in one project or one initiative, but usually that's how consultancies work in ADB. You are a consultant for a project, and your terms of reference is defined according to whatever that your role requires you to do. And if you can have multiple different consultancies. So I was also part of various different consultancies which is related to youth empowerment, because earlier, before being a consultant, I was hired as sort of an intern, but it was different from an ADB intern project. It was directly in a project where I was hired as a youth project designer, uh, specifically focusing on agriculture and natural resources sector, which means for around close to 2 years, I was supporting the NGOs and civil societies center of Asian Development Bank, where like I was helping them to define various different youth interventions in ADB projects. So, for example, if we take like a sanitation project in a specific developing member country in Asia, in that sanitation project, we used to analyze what kind of which area is the sanitation project taking place, what are the objectives of the sanitation project, what kind of implications does it have to young people on ground, and how can young people be involved in the project to better represent them, at the same time uh, having some specific components for the development of youth or engagement with youth. So for 2 years I was doing that. So And that in that role, I was supporting multiple projects. It was not limited to one project. As a consultant right now, since I'm limited to my own contract with one project, in the previous role I was supporting multiple projects as part of the NGOs and civil society center, because that is their mandate. They support various different projects and give their views and consultations and help with their project implementation and design.
So essentially, when you were hired as an intern, you were still performing the consulting role, but working across different projects. And now you've
Yes.
been hired as a consultant for a specific project, so you're like deep into this one project.
Yes, rightly put.
Okay, wow. So across these two different, or across all of these different projects that you worked uh, on, what would you say were your favorite and not so favorite aspects of like working?
Yes, I think the favorite aspect had to be the interaction with many partners, individuals, and organizations. Um, because I get to, I mean, I personally like to understand what different people are up to, what kind of initiatives exist outside. I mean, what methodologies are they using for their own to meet their own project objectives? What new technologies exist outside? So I think that's a very that's my favorite part, to just interact with new people. In most of the cases, that interaction with potential partners, of course, it does not lead to direct partnership, because the direct partnership with ADB is like very complicated. Uh, but like we do somehow support each other in we figure out how we are where we cross, and then we support each other in these activities. Like for example, if they also have a specific budget for civil society participation, and we also have a specific budget for civil society participation, then we mutually figure out an initiative that we can do together. So just figuring that part out, understanding what people are up to, that's my favorite part. And not so favorite part is just the heavy coordination that's required in these projects with various different stakeholders. I mean, it's very important to make sure that all the stakeholders are in the same page, but it's not so favorite for me, because you have to constantly follow up with people. You have to make sure that, like, there are some people who might require a lot of extra things to be done while we think that it's almost finalized. So we'll have to ensure that, like, everybody is on the same page. So that's a little bit can be frustrating sometimes, but it's of course very important. And it's not that favorite part for me. Yeah.
I can completely understand dealing with
Yeah,
so.
I mean, you had to follow up a lot with me also. So, I
No,
mean,
no, I wasn't referring to that. I was just referring to my previous stint while working with government as a consultant, and how it involves just dealing with so many people. And like every day you start with a list of, hey, these are the 15 things I need to follow up on. And that list, like you hope to cross off at least 10 out of those 15 to list. And you end up doing just like two or three and adding five more. Uh,
that's true, but it's I mean, for the people who can do a very good stakeholder coordination, are the people who really know how to follow up regularly, and I have a lot of my colleagues who are very good at it, and they get things done very quickly in comparison to others who don't like doing this. So it's a very good skill to have. Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. Awesome. So seems like you're doing some really exciting work at ADB, like solving financial inclusion in Indonesia, doing such a varied bunch of activities. Absolutely loved getting to know more about it, Sahil. Um, I think maybe now we can move on to the next section where we talk more generally about working at a multilateral organization. I know your experience has been focused on ADP specifically, but just from it's been such a long experience, and I'm guessing you would have also engaged a lot with other multilateral organizations given your work right now. So it would be great to get your sense of just like just to get a general sense of working at different multilateral organizations. I think the first thing I would like to ask is, what would you think are the different ways in which people can work with multilateral organizations? So I know your focus has been specifically in as a consultant at ADB, but there are so many different ways in which a person can engage with multilateral organizations. We've called few of those out in our in our development landscape, a document that I just shared with you earlier, where we spoke about how people can work in a research capacity, in an impact M&E monitoring and evaluation capacity, or grassroots implementation or funding capacity. Like, do you have any thoughts on these roles or some other roles through which people can work with multilateral organizations?
Yeah, certainly. So there is direct way of engaging with multilaterals and indirect way as well. What I can initially do is I can just share how I got engaged directly, and also meanwhile give you some examples of other means of engagement. Like for me, for example, as I mentioned, I was an intern for a while, and after that internship I used to help in developing project proposals. I used to help in supporting monitoring and evaluation specific to youth engagement or youth activities. I used to also give comments and do detailed desk research for specific projects if they needed any help. And after that, since I was directly engaged as an intern, uh, there was an opportunity that was open in Indonesia, which was related to financial inclusion. Though my interest was primarily in environment and sustainability, I thought, why not give this a try? And it was basically to directly. Then I was directly engaged as a consultant to design and implement a survey, a national level youth financial inclusion survey, because that kind of study was not done in Indonesia before. Uh, and I thought that it was a good opportunity to lead a team, directly be involved in a national level survey, working um, with the national financial inclusion, so like the government overall, and there is local organizations called TNP2K. So it was a good exposure. So there, I together with other consultants in government, we designed a survey which identified, of course, various different socioeconomic. There were socioeconomic factors in it. Identified various questions for understanding financial behavior and aspirations of young people in Indonesia. So that specific engagement and that research across Indonesia that led me to another initiative which was more related to financial education, which is also a consultancy. And then like basically then I got renewed into the same project with the same team because the project also continued for a long time. So that's an example of a direct engagement. You can engage as a consultant. You can have multiple consultancies at the same time as well. I chose to just focus on this particular consultancy. That's just my choice. But a lot of people, actually majority of the people, focus on multiple different consultancies. Um, then you can also become a staff, where a lot of people directly enter in a staff position. They're usually mid-career people who have very strong, who are industry experts, who have very strong exposure and background in a specific field. They are specialists in their area. Um, if you want to age range, it's around people who are 35 to 45 years old. I would say more than 40 to 50 also. uh, and those people that come from different sectors, and they direct apply to a staff position, and they get into it. um, there are other ways to also get into directly in ADB, which is mm, through these young professional programs, or programs similar to that. I think the World Bank has a similar program, which is, if I remember it correctly, it's called Junior Professional Program, if I'm not wrong, or something like that, or the Analyst Program. So where they focus on hiring young people into the multilateral sector. And I think there are young professional programs in many organizations now, not only in banks, but also in UN agencies, also in some NGOs or think tanks. So the like what they do in a young professional program is essentially they hire a person who's relatively unexperienced, and they train those people in different their internal departments. They have, I think they have a rolling system where for 6 months they work in one department, and for 6 months they work in another department, and I think after 2 years or something they have to choose which department that they have to work in for a longer period of time. So that's an example of a YPP. But those are direct ways of engaging with a multilateral organization. You can also be as an individual, if you want to engage, you can also engage indirectly. What I mean by indirectly is by working with a project implementation partner. An organization like ADB or multilateral organizations, they hire private companies or think tanks or research organizations to do a lot of their activities, because especially ADB, it's like a financing agency. It's a bank that finances a lot of development work. So they hire a lot of people and people and organizations. So you can be a part of the organization as an individual. So that's like indirect engagement, where you are indirectly working in an ADB financed or a World Bank financed project through a firm. The firm can be anywhere, from like anything from university uh, to like a consultancy, like the PwC, like a private consultancy. It can be an NGO, and it can be many things. And you can also be working, if you're a civil servant, then you can also be indirectly working with ADB, where ADB hires a civil servant or a government agency as an implementing agency, and then you work on an ADB project. So, yeah, long story short, there are multiple ways of engaging with a multilateral institution. Um, it doesn't matter which sector you are in, or if you're. It doesn't matter what kind of role you have. There are multiple different hiring opportunities in here.
So as you were saying this, I was creating a mental flow chart, and please let me know if I have this correct. In
Sure.
terms of being employed by a multilateral organization, there are direct and indirect ways. Within direct, you can work either permanently as a staff, which can be through the YP route or some other route, like the young professional route or similar programs or others, some other route, or you can work as a consultant, which is more of a contractual sort of a role, right? So
Right.
there's direct, within direct there's full time and sort of like contractual basis, and
Right,
within.
intermittent or continuous contracts. You can be a consultant also. You can be a contractor also. I think I don't know the differences between them, but there are also opportunities where I'm sorry to cut you there, but I just got reminded of there's something called becoming a secondee, where let's say if there is, I think I know a person. So if there's Plan International or I don't know, like WWF as an organization. Okay, so WWF has a project or an ongoing MOU with ADB, where sometimes they put in their own staff member to work within ADB.
So
That means you are seconded to
mhm.
work in ADB, but all your salary and everything, it is in ADB. I mean, they have their own standards of whatever salary it is. That's ADB standards, but it's being paid by a third party, another organization. So you're seconded from another organization. The government, you can be seconded by the government. You can be seconded by the private sector. I think private sector, I don't know if it's possible, but for sure, like an NGO, you can be seconded by them. So yeah, that's also another way.
So this is an example of indirect engagement, right? Because you're
Yes,
not employed by ADB, you're
it's somewhere in between,
it's
because
more in between.
because you need to have an MOU. So there
Mhm.
is a direct I mean, within the MOU or a partnership, it's mentioned that there will be a secondee.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
it's an organizational, let's say it's an organizational way of working with
Mhm.
ADB. Yeah.
Got it. So direct is where, let's say, ADB is directly paying a salary, just like for my clarity. Then there's secondment, which is where ADB knows that there will be secondees coming.
Right.
And
They
then
will
they,
host them. They will act. I mean, they have all the privileges, and their everything is like a staff.
mhm,
I mean,
got it.
but they're seconded by another
Got it. Got
organization.
it. So it's almost like a staff, but the salary comes from someone else. And
Yeah.
then there's indirect, where you're working for an ADB project, but you're actually a part of another organization in the truest sense, right? You're
Yes.
not as a secondee, where you're essentially functionally a part of ADB, but
Yes.
here you're functionally
The
a part.
project is financed by ADB, but yeah, you're like an employee of another company or an organization. Yeah.
And this sort of setup you're saying happens is common across multilateral organizations. It's not just specific to ADB.
Yes, yes. I'm pretty sure. I mean, in your experience also, you might
Yeah.
have come across so many people who are working in ADB funded projects, which
Yes.
means essentially their salary is actually coming from ADB, but it's through a
Yes.
firm or an organization, right?
Yes.
So,
Yes. I've seen a lot of people do that with even like indirect employment is like people do that through international bilateral agencies. Like I know people who were working on USA projects, right? But as part
right.
of some other organization. In fact, I
Exactly.
did that along with others that I know. So yes, like it's probably common across multilateral and bilateral agencies as
Yes.
well. Got it. So this was more around how you can be employed by these organizations, but in what other roles that you will do when you're employed? So there's a wide variety there as well, just because these are such large organizations and have such varied needs. So could you,
Right.
I know we can't cover all of these roles because there's so many, but
Yes.
for like just keeping for somebody who wants to work in the development sector, wants to focus not on the operational side, which is like finance, HR, etc., but more on the development aspect of the work, what would you say are the key roles that a person can work across? Yeah.
I mean, like for example, of course, like I don't know if there are key roles. I think there are technical roles as well. Like even things like an M&E expert, as you mentioned earlier, is a technical role, which usually is a consultant. Then you have all the other technical people coming in. For example, building a proposal for a solar park. You know, you need a technical expertise for that, or a person who has X amount of experience. So that's also a technical role. You sometimes need people just to do on-ground research work. So you need researchers who have some experience doing qualitative research on ground. So you need those people. You need people for like there are, as a consultant, they hire you for a specific uh, activity or a specific role. That's a part of a project. So you can also be hired as a videographer if you want to. If there is an opportunity, I think these are public opportunities. So if you want to check in ADB, for example, there is something called a consultant management system, cms.adb.org. You go and register yourself there, and then you can see uh, all the consultancy roles that is out right now, which is they have their public calling. So I think there is a mandatory seven day or 14-day period, especially for individual consultants, that they need to advertise it publicly, and uh, and you can apply it there. So there are so many different roles, from water engineering expert to M&E expert to researchers to a solar PV expert, or like there is a lot of things, like to a banking finance expert, to a professional videographer, or like a design person who, like, for example, I know that in financial inclusion there is a lot of focus on financial literacy. So we are quite a lot of times searching for graphic designers to build youth friendly, or like a specific content for a specific uh, profile of people. So quite a lot of times we need people for that. We need people for website development. So it's like a very, you can, whatever skill that you have, I think it's more like a skill based. If you're expert in a specific skill, then you might have an opportunity. Some might be more than the others. Like, for example, ADB works a lot in construction, like building roads and highways. So it usually happens through a firm, but sometimes there is a lot of more technical roles. And nowadays there is a lot of focus on clean energy. So if you're an expert in you've been part of developing various different solar parks or off-grid solar networks, then you will have a lot more opportunities in comparison to, let's say, what I'm doing, which is more focused on something which is youth engagement or youth development, or things which is related to young people, so which is a very niche area and not a lot of opportunities exist outside. So yeah, um, that can probably give you a background. As for staff, it's different. They usually want people who are good at managing initiatives and managing development projects, especially for a project officer role in a specific sector. They need some technical experience, of course. They need to have usually like at least a master's degree or a PhD. Nowadays, I think they prefer a lot of PhD candidates. And an experience, probably past experience working in development initiatives. Let's say if you are working, I mean, if you're working in the planning department of your country, or a lot of people in ADB, especially mid-career people, are ex-civil servants. So after they're finishing 10 years or 15 years of civil service, they sometimes come to ADB and work as a project officer. So yeah, that's I hope that answers your question.
Yes. So essentially, what you're saying is ADP hires a lot of experts in specific domains for their project requirements. And then when they do hire generalists, it's mostly for managing different projects. And the kind of background they're looking for is like a master's or a PhD, experience in program management, experience of working on development initiatives, or prior, like they also tend to hire a lot of prior civil servants for this role.
Right. And they also have a department of private sector, like IFC is, I think, for the way IFC is for World Bank. I think ADB has their own uh, department, which is private sector operating department. So they only provide development loans, but to the private sector, not to government agencies.
Okay, so essentially, this this sort of structure is common across different multilateral organizations. So, for instance, a World Bank would also tend to hire a lot of experts specific to their projects, and a lot of
Yes.
generalists with like higher education degrees and program management experience in this.
Yes. Yes. Yes, and I think there's a lot of like most of the people, especially the young guys that I have met, relatively young guys, like people who are 35, 40, they are they usually come from one of these top institutions, or like they have a PhD in a specific area. So there is also a lot of focus on higher education when it comes to hiring. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Got it.
I am the odd one out. So
So, what would you say an interview process at these organizations is like? Like, I know for experts, it will be very specific to the expertise area, but for generalists, where you talked about like needing program management experience and development experience.
yeah, as you rightly guess, that it highly depends on the role and the type of engagement you're having. So in usually in consultancy processes, um, it's not, you don't have an interview, like in a lot of cases, like it's because you have worked in a specific project or in a specific program. You have an exposure uh, to prior activities within that program or role. Sometimes you don't have an interview process. Like for me, after the initial consultancy, I did not have, I mean, after the first interview that I got into as an intern, there was a couple of stages of interview, which is pretty normal to all the other interviews that you might guess. There is a task that you have to do. I think I had to make a proposal or something, and there are multiple stages of interviews. After that, while in the consultancy, I did not have any interview because there are certain direct consultancies that you get into, because, like, for example, as an intern, I worked in this for building a proposal for this particular project. So the project officer knew that I was working on this particular initiative. I had the background information. I know all the other people working in this project and all the other players. So the project officer did a direct consultancy where she hired me directly, and then I think that's why I did not have an interview after that. But like there is no specific other any other new interview process. It's a very traditional way of getting hired. Multiple stages of interviews, maybe some tasks, and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, so when the interview happens, like you said, tasks or maybe like behavioral rounds, uh, and
I
if
don't think so. There is a behavioral round, but I mean, because as I mentioned earlier, it's designed for people who have like 15 years of experience, right? So
okay,
15 to 20 years of experience. It's not designed for um, for people who are relatively new. So I mean, when they have a certain background, they can the interview process is a very traditional way. They don't. I don't think so. They have any behavioral interviews, but of course, I think they check if you are if you uh, how do I say it? Like there is a certain competency based interview round. I think so. I think that might be close to behavioral interviews.
okay. So just to, for my own clarification, when you say it's a traditional interview, um, it involves doing some kind of task related to your role, like you said, you wrote a proposal.
It can, yeah.
And what else? Could you give a range of like different types of activities that you might be asked?
Well, they might determine what kind of competencies you have. Does it fit into ADB competencies that they want every staff to have? I think one another requirement usually for being an international consultant or an ADB international staff is that you have work experience in multiple countries. So that's something that they look at for sure. And on the basis of what the opportunity is, they understand if you have technical knowledge of that opportunity. So there might be a technical round in which you might have to create some proposals, or you might have to submit a specific concept note regarding the potential activities that you will be doing, or the procedure or the approach that you're going to be adopting. So yeah, I does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, it does. Great. Um, Moving on, what would you say, like generally speaking, are the pros and cons of working with multilateral organizations?
Right. I think the pros is like one of the things that I like about multilateral organizations is that you are able to work in different countries and in different development. You are exposed to a lot of development challenges. So in a way that like your mind is I mean, you do not like, for example, development challenges are complicated and it's different in different areas, even though the problems are similar. Let's say the problems related to deforestation in India is very different than problems of deforestation in Papua New Guinea. They might have very different backgrounds. There's a lot of different social local context that you need to understand. So I think it gives you a very broad idea about how what kind of challenges and solutions exist in the world. So I think that's definitely a pro. You're exposed to a lot of different countries that way. When it comes to cons, I think, as I mentioned earlier, like very few young people are engaged in multilateral organizations. I think it's because um, like they hire people who are much more experienced and specialists. So there is not a lot of room uh, for mistakes for that matter, because they want specialists in their field. And you don't see a lot of young people except like a few YPPs or consultants or interns. Like we were struggling to find people our age in the first 2-3 years that I was in Manila, because majority of the people were the age of my dad, or even my grandfather for that matter. So it's something that's of a con. I think they should definitely hire um, new young people with different skills and backgrounds, uh, so that like as a multilateral development institution, they are updated with the time and the issues that are there existing outside.
So, would this be a con in three different ways? One is that if you're a young professional, you will not have a lot of other young professionals to learn from, to interact with. Two, if like generally, if you're looking to enter the space, it might be difficult if you're a generalist and a young professional. And three, if you're an expert, because you're the expert and everyone is counting on you, there's limited scope of you making mistakes.
Yes, rightly put.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm sure the pros of like really working across different problems, different geographies is also very, very important and still attracts a lot of youth to work in such organizations. Um,
Right.
so finally, just on general multilateral experience, where have you seen people moving to after leaving these roles?
Yeah, for the younger people, they may stay in multilateral space. Like for example, if they are employed in World Bank, they might move to African Development Bank, or vice versa. Or if they're working in ADB, they might move to Inter American Development Bank, or like like it's they might move to other multilateral organizations, or even the UN for that matter. There is a lot of exchange between multilaterals in general for a younger person. For an older person, usually when people arrive, I think they usually arrive from a different organization, let's say from government to a multilateral. Uh, but there are some examples that I've seen where, from in mid-career, these people, if let's say they have an experience of 20 years working in multilateral, or 30 years, they might found their own development organization. I mean, they a lot of people have done that, where which means that they head and they found their own organization, development focused think tank or an NGO that works in a similar setting, but of course, like they get funding from multilaterals. So because they've worked in multilaterals, they have an advantage in terms of understanding how the overall process works. And there are some people who uh, go back to the government. Like for example, I think the finance minister of Indonesia, Sri Mulyani, she was working in World Bank. So she went back and um, to Indonesia and joined the government. Similarly, some people also, if you have a lot of experience, they go back and uh, like uh, head a specific NGO in a region, or a national, in a national area. So I think I know a couple of staff members who left ADB, and then they head the India division or the Pakistan division of a specific NGO.
Seems like people do great things or move to wonderful places after moving on.
There were like a few people, like some people just choose to retire. So
Yes.
because a lot of people enter in mid-career,
Yeah.
so by the time they
Mhm.
leave, they retire
Mhm.
from, and I think ADB is a good place to retire, I think. So for a lot of people.
Got it. Okay. And well, just to conclude now, would love to know what your biggest learnings or realizations or surprises have been while working here at ADB.
Sure. Like my biggest learning has been understanding the inner workings of a large scale project, a multilateral project, and the planning, the design parts of it, and the implementation challenges. I think that I did not know how complicated it was before, like seeing it actually happen from the planning stage to the implementation stage. I think it's been very interesting to be a part of this in general. Then if you want me to, let me just quickly open a document where I can show you. Yeah, for example, like for a project in ADB, there is something called an ADB project cycle, which starts with like a country partnership strategy. It's like a very broad strategy that you have multiple rounds of talks with the governments, and they create these regional cooperation and country partnership strategies, which leads to, like, there is a lot of thematic and sector based analysis that happens. Uh, and after that, there is something called country operations business plan or regional operations business plan that's developed. Then it goes to the preparation stage where they do initial poverty and social analysis. So, and a lot of these studies that's used to design the project. Then comes the approval phase where you have to get the approval from the government agency and the board of directors. And of course, like there is a lot of there are different rounds of consultations that happens from people on ground to national level consultations to within ADB consultations. Let's say if a project is being proposed, that means that particular document will be circulated across different departments for comments, and on the basis of each and every comment, you have to respond or make changes in your project accordingly. And then comes the implementation part, which is another challenge because there is a lot of procurement that requires, especially for like these organizations. They deal with millions of dollars worth procurement, so they need to make sure that everything is in place, because there's so much of money and this is public money involved. There is a lot of there is a lot of things that needs to be kept in check. For example, there's a lot of environmental assessments that needs to be done. There's a lot of, sometimes there are resettlements is required, so there is a lot of things that needs to be done there. And After all that, then when the implementation starts, there is a lot of monitoring and evaluation that carries on. So, and a project is like a 5 year to 7 year deal, like minimum. I would say, especially when it comes to loans or organizations. So I think that's where that's what I realized in general when it comes to um, the learnings of inner workings. And the realization is that, like, there is, you need a very wide range of knowledge to understand all these different moving parts, which is something that a lot of people say. A lot of people are focused into being a specialist in a specific area, which is definitely needed. But at the same time, if you are not if you do not understand how different moving parts function, and how, like, one part is related to another one, and another one um, gives rise to another area of work. So there's a lot of various moving parts, and if you have a wide range of knowledge, that helps you forecast and understand how things work. And Yeah, and I think the surprises are the inefficiencies in this like huge system, um, because these 5 year, 7 year, 10 year projects, there is a lot of change in personnel, a change in governments, political parties, etc., which has sometimes very bad influences in development agendas. So, and of course, there is kind of, you cannot. There is a lot of, because this is so many development agendas. There is a very few. There's few areas of innovation and freedom. So I think those were somewhat negative and surprising elements that I identified. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
That does. And finally, just I think this has been very, very useful to learn about your work at ADP, your reflections, and in general, your thoughts on overall working with multilateral organizations. Just before we conclude the interview, I wanted to check if you have any final thoughts or any word of advice for students and young professionals looking to enter, looking to work with multilaterals.
Yes, I think it's amazing. It's a very good opportunity and learning experience. Uh, a lot of people prefer to come in on the later stage, so that's also a good way to approach this. I mean, you build your profile, work on ground in the grassroots level, develop a certain expertise, and once you understand how a specific project, or like once you've developed, you have become a specialist or an expert, you can enter a multilateral development bank, which is which is also one way of approaching working with ADB. Meanwhile, if you also work with partner organizations like the firms that ADB hires, like you also have a very strong experience on how these proposals are, like ADB proposals are. So you can build and develop that background over the years, be patient, and then enter the organization when you're 40s or something. Another way is entering at a young age through multiple channels, as we discussed. The process is very competitive, especially for staff positions, like in programs like YPP. Thousands of people apply, and only a handful of people get selected. So don't be dejected. Also, if you don't get selected, if you get selected, awesome. But if you don't get selected, don't be dejected, because it's not completely also based on skill. There are sometimes internal quotas, um, like because there are so many member countries that I think there is an internal process of representation of which country or which personnel is being represented. I don't know the entire system, but I know that for a fact that there is an internal mechanism for that. There are many other ways to become a staff as well. If you are interested for consultancies, you can always keep on checking CMS and similar platforms for other multilateral development organizations. And I think, yeah, that's it. Overall, don't be scared to just apply. There's no harm in applying. But I mean, yeah, prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Just wanted to probe on one point you said, like keep checking out CMS or similar websites of different organizations. What I had observed based on my experience is that not a lot of these organizations check their public posting so much. They're often like just a way to follow the regulation. They might have people in mind already for these roles, and there's a lot of hiring through reference. So,
Yes.
how relevant do you think, or how useful is it to really apply to job openings without talking to people in these firms or
It's
hiring?
always, yeah. So you can. I mean, there is no harm in applying. I think one must always apply, because without applying, I mean, you never know what happens. So one must definitely always apply. Another way, for example, I know people who have done it in a different way also, which is, I think there was a PhD student who was almost finishing her thesis, and she applied for an internship. And I think an internship is usually for a short duration of time, around 3 months or something. And during that course of internship, um, I don't know her personally, but I know that I just talked to her once, where she talked to multiple people where she's interested to work in, and of course, like talked about her experience and everything. There are some people who liked her, so uh, in general, there is a personal rapport that has been built. Um, and when you apply for any positions, even if it's like in the private sector, the government, or multilaterals, it always helps to know the people who are working there. So, and to understand, to just like step in the waters a little bit, and to really understand what's going on. So that's also another way of entering. Like for me also, I only got I since my role is very it's not like something that's you can find it everywhere. It's a very niche area. The only reason why I got the consultancy was because um, I was working as an intern for 2 years, and knew a lot of internal processes and fields, and uh, um, because like there is I knew how to navigate within ADB. So in general, that always helps in any organization. Let's say if you want to get hired in any other private firm, also, if you know the people there and you understand the processes, and you know what kind of areas they're working in, what kind of challenges do they have, then you'd be a much better candidate than any other person who does not know all this. Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Awesome. I think that's all from our end. Thank you so much, Sahil, for taking out the time and sharing such valuable information and insights with us. I'm sure this interview would be very useful for our listeners?
No worries. I'm always happy to help. I wish you all the best. I think this is a great initiative that you have. And kudos to you and your team who are doing this in spite of studying full time or working full time.
Thank you so much.